Welcome to Conducting Effective Meetings, leadership training powered by conversational intelligence. Our agenda today will discuss different types of meetings, how to head off conflict within those meetings, and then roles. Roles are very important for all meetings, but especially for long meetings. If you have a day-long meeting or maybe even a 2 or 3 day long meeting, you absolutely must have roles in those. So what is the effective meeting? What does it look like? Well, first, it's important to establish the meeting purpose. Why are we having this meeting? Is it a problem solving? Are you trying to solve a problem? Are you sharing information? Are you gathering data? Are you making a decision? And if you are, who will make the final decision? Hopefully you already watched the video on decision making. Or is it simple team housekeeping? This is just our weekly meeting to explain what's going on in the department. Do you know that $37 billion of salary cost is wasted on unnecessary meetings in the United States for businesses? $37 billion. And there are actual programs that will determine, all you have to do is you put in your title or your social security number, and it automatically calculates based on what your salary is, how much that meeting cost. And you have to determine, is this a $5,000 meeting? Are we getting $5,000 worth of information or benefit out of it? It's a good idea to keep that in perspective when you have a meeting. Sometimes you don't even need a meeting, do you? You can simply send an email. So why have a meeting? Why not just send an email? If you must have two-way communication, for example, for brainstorming, problem solving, action planning. In other words, I as the leader need to talk, but my team needs to talk too. So there has to be two-way communication. If it's only one-way communication, send an email. If you expect participation and there are going to be roles and goals, if you expect participation, you've got to let them know. Also, does it need to be an hour? Or will 45 minutes work? Sometimes we need a 15-minute break between meetings. I've seen people who have to go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and there's no time for even a potty break. That's not right. That is wrong. So if you're just filling an hour because you have an hour, don't do it. Make it 45 minutes. Just because Outlook says it's going to be an hour doesn't mean it really should be. So determine, maybe you start 15 minutes after. It's better to end 15 minutes early than to start 15 minutes after. Here's a great option if you're just doing some quick information sharing. It's known as the 2-minute huddle or the round robin. And if you're familiar with Agile, this is also known as a scrum meeting. That means we stand up. You know why we don't sit down? I was in a team that we decided that we were going to follow Agile and do a Scrum stand-up meeting, but we had an actual meeting room available to us. So we sat down, and that 15-minute meeting, it was supposed to be only 15 minutes, ended up being 30 minutes every single time we sat down. It's just human nature. So that's why we want it to be a stand-up. It needs to be uncomfortable. Now it's hard for people who have high heels on. Then they certainly are welcome to take them off if they want to. But it's really a good idea for especially a 2 to 15-minute meeting to only be stand-up. It must always start on time. If somebody isn't there, guess what? They miss the part. We don't wait for them, even if it's the leader of the group. That's why it's important for the leader to have a backup so that everybody's not sitting around waiting because you had to have a quick potty break between meetings. And only give updates that affect others. You don't talk about anything that's just, oh, this is what I'm working on today. It doesn't matter. If what you're working on today will affect somebody else, then you talk about that. But otherwise, that's all it's about is I'm working on something and I'm going to need some help from 2 or 3 of you. And so be expecting it. Now, if you are doing a scrum based on the Agile methodology, it is only 15 minutes. It's never longer than 15 minutes, and there are only 3 things on the agenda. What I did yesterday, what I accomplished yesterday, what I'm doing today, and any blockers. You don't even discuss how to solve the blockers. You just say that this is something that's blocking me. And you go one at a time. Only one person speaks at a time. It's important to learn more about Agile if you're going to follow the Scrum because it's really based on a whole bunch of people working on the exact same project and different components of it. So I do have other training on that if you're interested, so you can look for that training. The number one rule to keep meetings effective and to make sure that you can manage the meeting is to have an agenda. It's funny because we didn't have agendas for this Tuesday meeting that we had every Tuesday, and the meeting always went 2.5 to 3 hours. And I had one woman who she was new to the team, and she said, "There's no agenda." And we said, "No." And so she started doing it. Even though it took her time to do it, guess how much time she was able to save on every Tuesday meeting? Remember, it ran 2.5 to 3 hours every Tuesday. It was condensed into 45 minutes. So she was buying her own time by taking the time to create that agenda, even though she wasn't even the boss. She said, "I will be happy to do this for us." And we all appreciated it, I can tell you that. So it's sent in advance. It has to have doable goals and real time frames. You can't say we're going to discuss this for 2 minutes when you know that we can never discuss anything for only 2 minutes. It has to be 10 minutes, for example. And if you can, and you should, determine the roles and expected participation. Here's a really good example. This is an agenda for a board meeting. Notice there's an opening and welcome for 5 minutes. Announcements and documents received, that's about information, and that is for 15 minutes. Approval of meeting minutes from the last time and an action list, that's the need here is approval, and then that's for 15 minutes, etc. You can see all the way down. Now, it's a good idea to have somebody in charge of each of those things. For example, the opening or the person who's managing the meeting. But then there should also be someone who's the timekeeper to be able to make sure that we stay on these times, and somebody else who's going to take notes. And one person doesn't do all of these things. Everybody should have a role within the meeting. Just like all of our conversational intelligence training on leadership, you know there must be some rules of engagement. Again, here are some suggested ones for meetings. No technology. People will be sitting there texting or reading email if you have it. That everyone is prepared in advance. That everyone listens and then asks great questions if they have any. That we only make useful comments. No naysaying. We use language of respect. We'll talk more about that later. That we take notes, especially of your promises. If you say you're going to do something in a meeting, you need to write it down so you can remember. That's nobody else's job but yours if you're going to make a promise to get something done. And be interested. Don't text or doodle while the meeting's going on. Now let's look at the roles of the meeting. The leader's roles are critical. It's important that the leader follow the agenda. That means you have to have an agenda and the time frame. Assign roles as necessary, and we'll have roles in a short meeting and different roles in a longer meeting, or more roles in a longer meeting. Ask questions to make sure that you encourage full participation. And be interested. Don't be the one that's sitting there doodling or texting or checking your emails. Make sure that you're participating. But here's a huge tip. To encourage leadership within your team, assign someone else to run your meetings. Just because you're the leader doesn't mean you have to run the meetings. Also, if you have to skip or be late to a meeting, the meeting will continue because somebody else is running it. And then you can participate as a participant. Instead of having to try to lead everyone else and encourage them to participate, you are able to just be a participant and speak up when necessary. This is great for getting your next generation of leaders, because your job as a leader is to encourage the next level of leaders. So this is a good way to do that. Let's look at some short meeting roles. We have the leader, but we must have a timekeeper to manage the agenda. Remember, on our agenda, we're going to assign so much time to each item, and this is the person that's going to keep track of that and say, we've talked about it for 5 minutes. Do you want to run over, or would you like to table it for next time? The facilitator, remember, that does not have to be the leader. It could be somebody else, somebody who's good at encouraging participation. The recorder, now a lot of times people say, I don't want to take notes, I'm not a secretary. But the thing is, you get to keep the meeting history. You get to determine what gets written down and what doesn't. So this is a really huge job that only someone you can trust should be able to do, because they get to determine in the future what was said today. And then if you don't have any of the other roles, you are a participant. That means you must participate. So this, for even an hour-long meeting, you should have these roles assigned. However, sometimes we have longer meetings. For a longer meeting, we need more roles. Somebody to be in charge of the agenda, And that means that they are also managing the meeting because they determine what goes on the agenda and the timing for it. They are really managing the meeting. The person who's in charge of information, they are in charge of our critical thinking to make sure that we're thinking appropriately about what's going into the meeting. Feelings reminds us to take our gut instinct. What are people feeling about this at this moment? Benefits, what are the rewards and feasibility of what we're saying? So this person has to look at it with a positive outlook. But then there's the problems person. They must look at it with based on a critical eye with the risks and difficulties. And creativity says, what new ideas can we garner based on what we've already discussed? It's important. These roles are very important, so we're going to talk about those in more in depth in just a few minutes. But now, what happens when people are frustrated and they just don't seem to be getting anywhere? People don't want to come to your meetings anymore. Well, these are the most common frustrations of participants and why they don't want to come to meetings, or they might have a tendency to fall asleep in the meetings. The first is no time management. You have to have an agenda that has the time built into it. So what can you say? Let's start without them to respect your time. If somebody else isn't there that you might be waiting on, start without them. If everybody knows that you're going to start without them, they're going to be more apt to be on time. The most frustrating thing is for those people who came on time and are sitting there wasting their time because somebody else is late and we're all waiting for them. Does that make sense? Make sure that we do respect their time. Another meeting frustration is personality clashes. So you have to address those prior to the meeting. If you know that two people don't get along, make sure that they don't sit near each other, they sit far away from each other. Best to address it and make sure that they learn how to get along before you have another meeting. Have it out with them. And that's something that we talk about in a future class on confrontation and how to confront people who need that confrontation. Conversation hogs, big frustration in meetings. People who talk too much or talk about the wrong thing at the right time. So it's a good idea to say something like, well, that's a great thought, Joan. We don't have the right people here to address that, or we don't have the bandwidth right now to address that, or the timing isn't right. See me afterwards. And always put the onus on them to come see you, because if they don't, then they aren't that fully invested in it. Don't be going after them. Wait for them to come to you. And then technical issues not planned for. Well, in the military, they say prior planning prevents poor performance. Think about what can you do. On several occasions, I've had my technology go down in the middle of a training session where people paid to come and see me all day. And I figured out ways around it. For example, if the projector goes down, then if there are laptops available and people have access to them, then you all pull up the presentation on laptops or in OneNote. If the computer goes down, then hopefully you have a printout of whatever it is that you plan to talk about. All right, we've talked about conflict, and one of the things that we can do to head off conflict is control those competing conversations. Now, I have noticed in my training that when people talk, it's generally not because of conflict, it's because they're excited about an idea. So make sure that you understand the difference between people having conflicts and people who are excited about an idea and just can't contain themselves. Sometimes after something big happens, give them a couple of minutes to discuss it among themselves and then come back and regroup. Call on them and ask them what was going on. So make sure that you understand the difference between conflict and just excitement. All right, so there are competing conversations. You know there's a possibility for conflict. So now is the time to use some nonverbal communication. You can give them the evil eye, like the guy in the picture, or you can walk over to them and stand next to them while they're having a conversation. So when they realize that you're coming, they will stop talking, hopefully. You can ask a question. What are your thoughts on this? Well, it sounds like you've got some input. What is it? In other words, don't say, stop talking. Ask them, what is it that you're talking about? Share it with us. This is it good information? Intervene. You might say something like, I'm afraid we're missing good ideas when everyone's talking at once. Remember, give them, if it's excitement talk, give them a minute to have it so they can fully flesh out their thoughts. But when it's time to move on, make sure you say, everyone's talking at once. We can't hear everything. There's some good stuff being missed. Let's only have one conversation. And just like in kindergarten and first grade, you can establish a group signal. And I know a lot of teachers that would make everybody put their finger up, one finger in the air to say, I hear you, I'm listening. And then pretty soon everybody starts noticing when it's getting quieter and everybody's got their finger up. Oops, oh yeah, yeah, I'm listening too. So, but that's one thing that you definitely want to plan on in advance and make sure that everybody knows that that's the rule for the group signal. We need to look at our language and make sure it's language of respect. I did some substitute teaching in a elementary school, and everywhere there were signs saying respect one another. Even in the restrooms, there were signs saying respect one another, big banners hanging in the hallway. And I had a class that was very rambunctious. They were working on a project that was very exciting, and I was letting them work in their own groups that way. And another teacher burst into the room, turned off the lights to make sure that she got everyone's attention, and started yelling at certain students. And I thought, where's the respect? First off, she did not respect me for my skills as a teacher in controlling the class, because the class was controlled. And then she showed no respect to the students. So make sure that we show respect. I thanked her for her intervention. I said everybody's doing exactly what they should be doing in here, and that we had no more need for her assistance, but thank you for inquiring to get them out of there. And then I told the kids that had been yelled at that sometimes people misunderstand what's going on and that they're doing exactly what they should be doing, so keep doing it. I suggest we listen to Nathan and verify that we understand what he's saying when people are starting to say, that's just stupid, that won't work, Nathan's got it wrong. Well, let's hear exactly what he has to say first. Maybe we misunderstood. Here's another potential language for you to use. Well, that's a great point. Because we don't have time to address what's not on the agenda, let's take that offline. Make sure you say that's a great point. That you don't even have to say great if you don't feel that way, but it's a good point. The fact is that they're bringing it up. All ideas are good when they're shared. So that's a good point is fine. You can say that because it is true. And my favorite, if you've been in some of my conversational intelligence training already, you know, feel, felt, found. It's one of the most powerful phrases that we can use to get people on our side. I understand how you feel. I felt the same way. Then I found out, and then you tell them why you don't feel that way anymore. And it helps them understand that, one, you get it. You understand what they're saying. And two, why you changed your mind about it. And that helps them to understand why they might want to change their mind as well. Another great tool is the Fistified. It's a quick gut check to find out how's it going. And it could be a simple, how do you feel? Or it could be, how is the temperature in the room? Or how do you think the atmosphere is in here? Something like that. So you say on a scale of Fist to 5, how do you like this? For example, Fist means I hate it. 5 means I love it. And 3 means I could go either way. So you just want people to raise their hands real quick to tell you how are they feeling. How's the temperature in here? Fist to 5, etc. So that you can get a quick feeling, and it's not just a hand raise. It's actual. It's a level of how much I like it or don't like it. So Fist to 5 is good for any kind of a quick gut check. First is the agenda, managing the meeting. Remember we saw that earlier? They are responsible for the focus and time. They decide the topics that go into the agenda. They create the actual paper agenda and the time frames. They invite participants and manage participation. They summarize, conclude what is going to be discussed, and they plan the next steps at the end of the meeting. So this is a very important role. So you want to give it to somebody who's good at organizing and paying attention. Information. This is critical thinking. It's so that we can understand or determine the difference between the facts and opinion. Sometimes we voice opinion as if it were fact, and it's important that somebody pay attention and understand the differences. So the information role will ask, what do we need and how do we get the information that we need? They assess the relevancy and the accuracy of what has been presented. They note when views conflict so that it's clear to everyone, and they determine the accuracy and relevance of the information. Feelings. This is the gut instinct. This is important to know because sometimes people just don't feel right about something. And maybe you don't know why. So this is not facts, but it is intuition. And sometimes intuition is as strong as fact, and sometimes it's not even close. So it's important to have somebody determine the feelings and priorities. So it represents how people are currently feeling. So it checks team buy-in or commitment. Ask what does my intuition tell me, and ask the participants to give a fist of five on how are you feeling about this and what is my gut reaction. Benefits. This is the person who looks for the rewards and feasibility of the ideas that are coming up. Remember, these are roles for longer meetings, like a full day meeting or a 2 or 3 day meeting or even a week-long meeting. So somebody needs to make sure that we're looking at the optimistic view, that we don't have too many naysayers. Describes why an idea is valuable or might work. Balances dominance of the problems role. So this goes hand in hand with the problems role, which is the next one we'll look at. And finds the benefits and values. Now, the problems looks for the risks and difficulties. We usually don't have problem finding somebody like this. Maybe in a sales meeting, because all the salespeople have to be optimistic and upbeat, and so someone has to play this position. But in most meetings, we usually have people who volunteer for this without being asked. But they share the logical reasons and thinking that doesn't fit the facts. So now, remember, we were looking at feelings earlier, and feelings are important, but now we look at the skeptical view. Why wouldn't this work? Uncovers potential problems or why it won't work, and it complements the benefits role. We every time we have a benefits role, we want a problems role, and vice versa. Don't have one without the other. Creativity. You won't always need creativity, but if you're trying to come up with new ideas, you definitely want a creativity role. And this looks for innovation and alternatives. Asks how, not how much does it cost. How can we make it happen? Is this an option? Can we look into this more? Ensures every idea is considered valuable and not judged. Remember, we were looking at that when we were doing brainstorming and decision making. So this is the person that says, good idea, what else? Remember the duck, the don't use creativity killers? They discourage creativity killers as the keeper of the duck. So that's why it's a good idea to actually have a duck. Now, if you don't want to use a duck, you can use some other tool, but it's a really good idea to actually have that rubber duck to remind people don't use creativity killers like it won't work. So because when you're being creative, you cannot hear those. It stops the creativity process. Next time, we're going to be talking about managing your time, controlling the events in your day, prioritizing effectively to make sure that you're doing the effective things, not just the easy things, and delegating, how to delegate. And we'll give you a 5-step process for actually getting other people to do your work for you and want to do it.